friends, it's Jessie here. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. For today's video, I've got something totally different for you. I'm going to be talking about all of the books I read in January. I made it part of my goals this year to read more. I set a goal of reading 52 books. I felt like that was a really easy goal to meet. If I just, read a book a week, I'd be able to complete that. And I have far exceeded that in January. I read 9 books in the month of January, and I'm going to tell you all about the books I read, if I liked them, if I didn't, and maybe give you a little sneak peek of what I'm going to be reading into February and throughout the rest of the year. So I know that book content is not my usual content here, but I'm just really excited about everything I've been reading. Thought it would be fun to share with you. My favorite YouTuber is Kayla from Books and Lala. She's a booktuber. And while my channel is not turning into a booktube channel and my videos are nothing like hers, I'm just into book content, and I thought you might be too. So let's go ahead and get into everything I read this month. So I set myself a little personal reading challenge. In addition to reading 52 books in the year, I really wanted to focus on reading Stephen King. I have been a fan of Stephen King novels since I was a kid. If you're familiar at all with his work, which I feel like you'd have to be living under a rock not to be, even if you've never read anything by Stephen King, I'm sure you've heard of him. He writes amazing horror novels for the most part. He's got some other novels as well. A zillion of his books have been adapted into films and TV shows, and I've always been a fan, like I said, but there's a huge collection of his work that I haven't read. And so I set myself a little challenge for 2024, and that's to read as many Stephen King books as I can get through in the year, and I want to read them in publication order. So I did a quick Google search. I found a list. Is the list accurate? I don't know. I don't know if it's perfect. Maybe some things are a little bit out of order, but that's the list I'm using. I will link the list down below if you're interested in joining along with me and doing this too. I just think it's so fun. And I have been just kind of going down the line, checking books off the list. When I get a little burnt out on horror, I do a little flip-flop and I read something else. I got through 9 books in January. Quite a few Stephen King novels, but quite a few that weren't. I'm going to open up my Goodreads because that's where I've been keeping track of everything. And that's just going to help me to stay on topic with this video. But I can tell you that I started out 2024 reading Carrie. Carrie is not a new novel for me. I have read Carrie on a couple of different occasions. I've seen the movie with Sissy Spacek at least a dozen times. It's one of my all-time favorite horror films. And even though I'd read it before, I wanted to revisit it. It had been many years since I read it, and it holds up, you guys. Oh my gosh, what a great debut novel for Stephen King. I absolutely loved it. I feel like I loved it and appreciated it even more reading it now than I did. I read it the first time, I think, when I was 14 or 15 years old. I feel like a lot of the stuff went over my head back then. I think I read it again in my mid-20s, but reading it as a full-grown adult, it just hits a little bit different. I thought it was an incredible novel. I rated it 4 stars. I do a rating scale of 1 to 5, 1 being a complete dud, I did not even finish the book, 5 being best book I ever read, and Carrie got a solid 4 from me. I thought it was really, really good. It's a little bit of a shorter novel from Stephen King, so it doesn't suffer from the thing that some Stephen King novels do, where it goes on and on and on a little bit too long, and there's like a chunk in the middle that could have been skipped over maybe. A lot of times Stephen King doesn't quite stick the ending for me, but Carrie is an exception to that. I thought it was a phenomenal novel, 4 stars, and I watched the movie. Of course, that's part of this challenge, is watching the adaptations, and loved it. I watched the original, like 1974 version with Sissy Spacek in it. That's a classic. It still holds up. And then I also watched a newer adaptation from like the mid 20-teens ish, I think. 2015, 2013, something like that. I wasn't crazy about that adaptation. I thought it was interesting, some of the choices that were made with it, but overall it didn't really do it for me. So if you're going to pick one or the other, I recommend the 70s version. I think it is elite, and I think the book is great. Highly recommend it. All right, so that was the first book I read. Started out the year strong, and I read that super quick. It's a pretty short novel. And during that time, I was also listening to an audiobook. Audiobooks are new for me. I've never really been into them, but I work in an office now. I find myself with a little bit of downtime here and there, and a lot of my work is just like manually entering things into a computer, so it's kind of mindless. So I find that I can listen to audiobooks while I'm at work, and that is a big part of the reason why I was able to read so many books in January. Working full-time, running this YouTube channel, being a mom, doing all the things, I don't have as much time to read as I would like. I have been dedicating at least 20 minutes every evening as part of my evening routine to read, but if that was all I was reading, I would not have gotten through 9 books. Definitely audiobooks have helped, and the book that I was listening to is The 12-Week Year by Brian P. Morgan. And this is nonfiction, like self-help style, talks about the concept of thinking about your goals in sessions of 12 weeks rather than a whole year. I thought it was an appropriate book to read right at the start of the year, with New Year's resolutions and goals being heavy on my mind. And this is just the concept of having a shorter time period, because you get that early motivational push like you get like at the beginning of January, where you're really motivated to make things happen. And then pretty quickly after that, you get that end of the year like boost to try to kind of complete the goal before the year ends. So doing it in a 12-week period kind of makes you more likely, I guess, to meet your goal. Like, how often have you set a goal in January and then by like February 15th, you've forgotten about it? Doing it in 12 weeks makes it harder to forget about it. It makes it easier to keep it a priority because you only got 12 weeks to do it. It was an interesting read. I really liked it. The audiobook was good. I rated it 4 stars. Again, really good. Then it was back to Stephen King. I read Salem's Lot on my Kindle. That is another thing that has made it so much easier for me to read. I take my Kindle with me absolutely everywhere. If I have 10 minutes in the car where I'm waiting for my son to come out of a practice, I'm reading. If I'm sitting in the waiting room of a doctor's office, I'm reading. This has been the other major game changer for me. I got the Kindle Paperwhite in December, and I absolutely love it. So I read Salem's Lot, Stephen King's second novel, on my Kindle. I rated this one 3 stars. There were parts of this book that I really loved. I am a huge fan of the way Stephen King writes his characters, how he gives you all of the details and he really fleshes everyone out. Even like secondary characters that aren't super important, you know things about them. And I loved that about this book. there is a particular chapter in Salem's Lot where he's like going around the whole town and talking about all of the characters. And while that's probably not going to be for everyone, I loved that part. What didn't really do it for me was the vampire story. I didn't think it was super creative. I've heard a zillion vampire stories in my life, and this one wasn't like especially interesting in my opinion. It was a very well written book, but it kind of did the thing where it dragged a little bit. I wasn't super thrilled with the main character. I didn't think he was anything special. Ben Mears just was kind of there. So overall, it was a good book. I did like it. It's not like it was terrible and I wanted to just put it down, but it took me a little longer to read. I wasn't as enthralled with the story. And because of that, it got 3 stars. I know that Salem's Lot, for a long time, Stephen King said was his favorite novel that he'd ever written. I don't get the hype on that one. Okay, fresh battery in my camera. Let's keep going. Let's talk about the Salem's Lot adaptation. I rented this on Amazon. It was the only way that I could access it. It was like gloriously 70s cheesy. I loved that aspect of it. I feel like it was a pretty solid retelling of the story. Because it wasn't my favorite story, it therefore wasn't my favorite adaptation. But overall, the adaptation was good. I know there has been a more modern take on Salem's Lot that they did. And I don't think that was a movie. I think it was like a series, like a, I don't know. I don't know much about it. Clearly, I didn't watch it. If you think it's worth watching, let me know and I will. But because the more modern adaptation of Carrie was so bad, I kind of had bias in my head that the more modern adaptation of Salem's Lot would also be bad, so I didn't bother to watch that one. I did watch the 70s version, though, and it was fine. All right, this video is going to be long. I hope you like a long video. Next up, after I read Salem's Lot, I read Rage. If you're not familiar with Rage, Rage was a story that Stephen King released under a pseudonym. He released it as Richard Bachman, and there's kind of a sinister thing with this book. It is about a school shooting, and Stephen King pulled it off the shelves because apparently there were a couple of real-life school shootings, and the shooters were in possession of Rage, and he just thought it was best to take it off the shelves. So you can't really read this anymore. It is part of a novel that has 4 of Richard Bachman, aka Stephen King's stories. It's included in that. The Bachman books is what it's called. I was able to find a copy of it to read just online somewhere. And I think like the fact that it's obviously a really taboo topic, which Stephen King has never been shy about tackling. The fact that he pulled it from shelves, so it's kind of like a banned book almost. I was really intrigued to read it. It's like one of those things, like if you're not supposed to read something, you just want to read it more. I really liked it. I thought it was incredibly well written. I actually really liked the main character, which made me feel icky, given that he's just murdered his teacher, and he's done these terrible things, but he was a likable character. The concept of the book is just this kid with a gun comes into this class, he murders his teacher, it's awful, and then he sits and he talks with the class, and they talk about the past and they reminisce about different things. It was really well written. I didn't love the ending. It kind of went in a weird direction that I wasn't expecting. I gave it a 4. I liked it much better than Salem's Lot. I read it much quicker. I don't think there's an adaptation for this. If there is, I haven't seen it, so you guys will have to, enlighten me if there is something that I should have watched to go with it. But overall, I did enjoy it. Very taboo subject. but very well written. And it was just the ending that kind of took the rating down. If the ending had been better, it probably would have been a 4-star read for me. After that, I needed a palate cleanser, so I switched and I read Just Feel Good, The Secret to the Life You've Always Wanted by Andrew Capp. This was a pretty short, like self-helpy type novel. I read a lot of those. I actually really like nonfiction that is meant to teach you something or meant to help you improve in some way. This was fine. It was a lot of like the power of positive thinking. Talk like that. Like, you can do everything. All you have to do is believe you can. That style. I kind of like a positive, like silver lining on a dark cloud type thing, but it was even a little much for me. Still, it was well written. I got something out of it. I rated it 3 stars. You could probably skip that one. This wasn't like the greatest book of all time, but I did enjoy it. And it was nice to take a little bit of a break from the horror. After that, I went in a totally different direction, and I read I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. Have you guys seen the Will Smith movie, I Am Legend? That movie is sort of based on the book, although they're very, very different. I had always wanted to read I Am Legend because I had heard that it was so different from the movie. I loved the movie. I liked it a lot. I thought Will Smith was incredible in it. Didn't quite like the ending of the movie, although if you've ever seen the alternate ending, I thought the alternate ending of the movie was better, and it was more in line with what the book was. I really liked this book. I thought it was really well done. There were some parts of it that felt a little bit rushed, a little bit inconsequential, like you spent 3 or 4 chapters building up to something that just kind of never happened, or that went a different direction than what I expected. But overall, I did like it. I liked the book better than the movie, and I actually really loved the movie. So I do recommend it. It's different, though, than the movie for sure. And I'm sorry if I'm not like spending a ton of time describing these books. I don't want to go into spoiler territory too much, and I also don't want this video to be 100 hours long. So if you want more information on any book, let me know, and maybe I'll do a separate review. After that, I read Better Than Before, Mastering the Habits of Our Everyday Lives. This is one of the books that I was reading as part of my evening routine, just a couple of chapters at a time. It took me a long time to get through the whole thing, but I really enjoyed it. It's another one of those self-help nonfiction mastering the habits, it's right there in the title. I liked it a lot. It was a 4-star read. That is one that I do recommend. I feel like it was a little bit overly long and it could have wrapped up quicker, but I got a lot out of it. I did enjoy it, and I would consider revisiting it again. So as you can see, I read a bunch of Stephen King all in a row, and then I took a big long break. And that is because the next book I read was The Shining. And I know that The Shining is some people's favorite Stephen King novel, a lot of people's favorite Stephen King novel. But I wasn't excited to read it. I had seen the Stanley Kubrick movie a bunch of times. It's a great movie, but haunted house stories aren't really my favorite. Plus, with it being so many people's favorite books, I know that the same was true with Salem's Lot, and I didn't really like Salem's Lot all that much in comparison with some of the other Stephen King novels. So I was in a bit of a reading slump. I didn't really want to read The Shining, but it was next on the list, so I couldn't go forward and read some other Stephen King books that I was more interested in. So I had kind of paused the Stephen King journey kind of mid-month and picked it up more towards the end of the month with The Shining. I finally read it, and you guys, I absolutely loved it. It was my favorite book of the month. So I was obviously wrong. I don't know why I kept putting it off so much, other than the reasons I mentioned, I guess, but it was incredible. The movie, if you absolutely love the movie, the book is very different from the movie, has a different ending. The book's way better, in my opinion. I loved it. It's like quintessential Stephen King. The way he writes is just perfection. I loved it pretty much from the word go, like from the very beginning. As soon as I finally just sat down and started reading it, I didn't want to put it down. 5 stars, best book I read all month. Highly recommend it. Yeah, I can't say anything else about it. The way that the Overlook Hotel was really just another character in that story did it for me. I really, really liked it. And the way that the Shining, like the little boy's abilities were explained in this book were just, it was a masterpiece. I loved it. I completely just finished this video and totally forgot to talk about a couple of books that I am in the middle of reading. So I'm going to insert this somewhere in the middle of the video. It's probably an awkward, like, cut, weird transition, but I got to fit this in here somewhere. In addition to all the books that I have read in January, I've also been working on these guys. These have been part of my evening reading ritual, just like the one I talked about, Better Than Before. I've been kind of taking these a little bit at a time each evening. These specifically are like daily reads, so you read a little passage every single day. So I'm not going to finish these books until the end of the year, but I wanted to talk about them because I'm actually loving both of them and I want to recommend them to you. So the first is The Daily Stoic, 366 Meditations on Wisdom, Perseverance, and the Art of Living. It's by Ryan Holiday and Stephen Hanselman, and it is just a little bit to read every day. There are dates. Hold on, let me get past here. Dates at the top of each passage, and then there's just a little passage for you to read every day. This is all about Stoicism. There's a lot of wisdom and knowledge in here that I've really been enjoying. I've been recommended this book by multiple people in my life, and I've seen it recommended all over BookTube. So I didn't really know what it was when I picked it up, and I still don't really know. Like, I know that it's new translations of some pretty famous philosophers, Marcus Aurelius, etc., etc. But it's just like really interesting to read every night. And as I read more of it and I grow to understand it more, I'll probably talk about it more in future reading videos. But I love the concept of just reading a little passage every single day. So I have this for that, and I have this for that. And this I absolutely love. I'm a bit of a poetry nut. I love poetry. I know that's not like a popular thing, but I love it. I find it so beautiful. Some of the prose that's written in here. And this is just a collection of poems. Some I've read before, some I never have. And it's a different poem to read every single day of the year. So much like the last book, there's a date and then a little poem, and you just, today is February 3rd when I'm filming this. So I would just go to February 3rd this evening. The one that I will be reading is Adventures of Isabel by Ogden Nash. And it tells a little bit about the poem sometimes. It says Nash wrote this poem for his own daughter Isabel, who must have been a particularly fearless child. And then it's just the poem itself. And I've been loving this. It's introduced me to a lot of poetry I've never read before. And I love poetry. So it's just been something I look forward to reading every night along with the Daily Stoic. And I'm just excited to have it. It's a beautiful cover, and it just looks so pretty on my nightstand next to my bed. And yeah, I've been reading a little bit of this every night, a little bit of this every night, and then typically a little bit of nonfiction as well, because I try to read for 20 minutes a night. Sometimes it's even more, but at least 20 minutes. And it typically only takes me about 5 minutes to get through these. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure to mention those. Now let's get back to what I've already recorded. And the very last book that I read in January of 2024, it's another audiobook. I listened to it exclusively on audio, and it was A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. Maas? I don't know. It's a young adult novel. It's fantasy. I'm sure you've heard of it because everybody on TikTok was talking about it. Everybody on BookTube was talking about it. What a great story, and I concur. I loved this book. I know that I'm 39 years old, but I love a good YA novel. This one was great. The writing in some places was, a little bit iffy for me. It wasn't like the best written book ever, but I am so in love with the characters of the story. I am so in love with the setting, the way that certain things are described, all of the magic and the creatures and everything about it. I cannot wait to continue in this series. I absolutely loved it. And this was a 4-star. I couldn't give it a 5-star because the writing was just a little off for me. It wasn't the, like I said, most well-written story I'd ever read, but I am hooked. I'm obsessed with the characters. I'm obsessed with the story. I can't wait to see where it goes. And you will definitely be seeing more books in the series coming as I continue to do this What I Read This Month series, which I'm hoping to do all year long. So I'm hoping that this video doesn't completely flop. I know that book content is not my usual content, and it's probably not everyone's cup of tea, but I'm hoping that you all like this video enough that I can continue throughout 2024 because I'm loving reading. I've always been a big reader, but the last several years, I haven't had as much time for it, or I haven't made it a priority. And making it a priority again and getting to read so many great novels has been so much fun, and I've loved it. I do have Kindle Unlimited, so if you have any book recommendations at all, really, anything you'd like to see me read, leave the suggestion down below, but especially if it's a Kindle Unlimited read, I'd love to hear from you. That was everything I read in January. So excited to continue with more Stephen King in February, more ACOTAR in February, and we'll see what else I can get up to. All right, friends, that's it. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.